That's one of my songs. That's not. I promise. You'll never hear it though. Ooh, the Indian accent's really gonna get me into trouble. But I think it is funny, so it's staying. Right. I wonder why YouTube is recommending this kind of thing to other people. And then again, you have got to remember that 1984 is not a fun book. I mean, it's a fun book, but it's not a fun book, you know what I mean? Do you know what? Nami? Nami? Huh, I wonder if I can fade you a little bit. Let's try fading this. Do, 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 do. Yeah, that's pretty much like a watermark, isn't it? Yeah, I'll keep that there. Yeah, works for me. I reckon I've got about an hour before I disappear for food. She flung herself into his arms, kissed him almost violently, and a moment later pushed her way through the saplings and disappeared into the wood with very little noise. Was that me making that flash? Oh, it was. Oh no. I'll get back into this now. I disappeared into the wood with very little noise. Right, cool. We're all caught up. Good. Even now he had not found out her surname or her address. However, it made no difference, for it was inconceivable that they could ever meet indoors or exchange any kind of written communication. And as it happened, they never went back to the clearing in the woods. During the month of May, there was only one further occasion on which they actually succeeded in making love. Oh, they're making love now. Oh, that's hot. This was in another... This was in another hiding place known to Julia, the belfry of a ruinous church in an almost deserted stretch of country where an atomic bomb had fallen 30 years earlier. Yeah, you want to go there. That's fantastic. You won't get any radiation or anything. It was a good hiding place when once you got there. But the getting there was very dangerous. For the rest they could meet only in the streets, in a different place every evening, and never for more than half an hour at a time. In the street it was usually possible to talk after a fashion, as they drifted down the crowded pavements, and not quite abreast, and never looking at one another. They carried on curious, intermittent conversation which flicked on and off like the beams of a lighthouse, suddenly nipped into silence by the approach of a party uniform or proximity of a telescreen, then taken up again minutes later in the middle of a sentence, then abruptly cut short as they parted at the agreed spot, then continued almost without introduction on the following day. Julia appeared to be quite used to this kind of conversation, which she called talking by installments. Huh. I've lived like that before. Interesting. She was also surprisingly adept at speaking without moving her lips. Just once in almost a month of nightly meetings, they managed to exchange a kiss. They were passing in silence down a side street. Julia would never speak when they were away from the main streets. When there was a deafening roar, the earth heaved, and the air darkened, and Winston found himself lying on his side, bruised and terrified. A rocket bomb must have dropped quite near at hand. Suddenly, he became aware of Julia's face a few centimeters from his own, deathly white as chalk. Even her lips were white. She was dead. He clasped her against him and found that he was kissing a large, warm face, but there was some powdery stuff that got in the way of his lips. Both of the faces were quickly coated with plaster. There were evenings when they reached their rendezvous and then had to walk past one another without a sign, because a patrol had just come round the corner or a helicopter was hovering overhead. Even if it had been less dangerous, it would still have been difficult to find time to meet. Winston's working week was 60 hours, Julia's was even longer. Equality. And their 3 days varied according to the pressure of work and did not often coincide. Julia, in any case, seldom had any evening completely free. She spent an astonishing amount of time in attending lectures and demonstrations, distributing literature for Junior Anti-Sex League, preparing banners for Hate Week, making collections for the savings campaign and such like activities. It paid, she said. It was camouflage. If you kept the small rules, you could break the big ones. She even induced Winston to mortgage yet another of his evenings by enrolling himself for the part-time munition work, which was done voluntarily by zealous party members. So one evening every week, Winston spent 4 hours of paralysing boredom, screwing together small bits of metal which were probably parts of bomb fuses, in a drafty, ill-lit workshop where the knocking of hammers mingled drearily with the music of the telescreens. When they met in the church tower, the gaps in their fragmentary conversation were filled up. It was a blazing afternoon. The air in the little square chamber above the bells was hot and stagnant. The smelt overpoweringly of pigeon dung. They sat talking for hours on the dusty, twig-littered floor, one or the other of them getting up from time to time to cast a glance through the arrow slits to make sure that no one was coming. Julia was 26 years old. She lived in a hostel with 30 other girls. Always in the stink of women. How I hate women, she said parenthetically. And she worked, as he had guessed, on the novel writing machines in the fiction department. She enjoyed her work, which consisted chiefly in running and servicing a powerful but tricky electric motor. She was not clever, but was fond of using her hands and felt at home with machinery. She could describe the whole process of composing a novel, from the general directive issued by the planning committee down to the final touching up by the rewrite squad, but she was not interested in the finished product. She didn't much care for reading, she said. Books were just commodity that had to be produced, like jam on bootlaces. Alright, we'll stick with the bootlaces thing. Commodity. You don't need bootlaces, just get tighter shoes. Are you kidding me? It's easy. There we go. Suggest accents for me to read this with. There we go. She had no memories of anything before the early 60s, and the only person she had ever known, who talked frequently about the days before the revolution, was grandfather, who had disappeared when she was 8. Oh, she was 8, was she? Oh, that's interesting. I feel like we're learning more about her than we should. At school, she had been the captain of a hockey team and had won the gymnastics trophy 2 years running. Why was she running if she's in the hockey? Do you mean... Oh, I get you. Sorry, I misread that. She had been a troop leader in the Spies and the branch secretary in the Youth League before joining the Junior Anti-Sex League. 26. Junior Anti-Sex League. Okay, I mean... Okay. Okay. She had always borne an excellent character. She had an infallible mark of good reputation. She had even been picked out to work in Pornosec, the subsection of the fiction department which turned out cheap pornography for distribution among the paroles. Oh, really? Well done. It was nicknamed Muckhouse by the people who worked on it, she remarked. There she had remained for a year, helping to produce booklets in sealed packets with titles like Spanking Stories or One Night in a Girls' School, to be bought furtively by proletarian youths who were under the impression that they were buying something illegal. What are these books like? Said Winston curiously. Oh, ghastly rubbish. They're boring, really. They only have 6 plots. They swap them around a bit, of course. Yeah. You've got your pizza delivery guy, you've got your plumber, you've got your parcel delivery guy, you've got your postman, you've got your policeman, and your fireman. Yeah, there you go. There's all of them, all 6 of them. These days you're gonna add like stepmom and stuff like that, I guess. I was only on the kaleidoscopes. I was never on the rewrite squad. I'm not literary, dear. Not even enough for that. Oh, okay. That's nice to know. He led with astonishment that all the workers in Pornosec, except the heads of the departments, were girls. The theory was that men, whose sex instincts were less controllable than those of women, were in greater danger of being corrupted by the filth that they handled. I don't even like having married women there, she added. Girls are always supposed to be so pure. Here's one who isn't, anyway. Well, she had her first love affair when she was 16, with a party member of 60, who later committed suicide to avoid arrest. And a good job too, said Julia. Otherwise, they'd have had my name out of him when he confessed. Since then, there had been various others. Life as she saw it was quite simple. You wanted a good time. They, meaning the party, wanted to stop you having it. You broke the rules as best you could. She seemed to think it just as natural that they should want to rob you of your pleasures, that you should want to avoid being caught. She hated the party, and said so in the crudest words. She made no general criticism of it. Except where it touched upon her own life, she had no interest in party doctrine. He noticed that she never used newspeak words except the ones that had passed into everyday use. She never heard of the Brotherhood and refused to believe in its existence. Any kind of organised revolt against the party, which was bound to be a failure, struck her as stupid. The clever thing was to break the rules and stay alive all the same. He wondered vaguely how many others like her might be in the younger generation people. Like her, there might be in the younger generation people who might have grown up in the world of the revolution, knowing nothing else except the party as something unalterable, like the sky, not rebelling against its authority but simply evading it, as a rabbit dodges a dog. Alright. They stole it. They did not discuss the possibility of getting married. It was too remote to be worth thinking about. No imaginable committee would ever sanction such a marriage, even if Catherine, Winston's wife, could somehow have been got rid of. It was hopeless even as a daydream. What was she like, your wife? Said Julia. Whoops. She was... Do you know the newspeak word for good thinkful? Meaning naturally orthodox, incapable of thinking a bad thought. No? Didn't know the word. But I know a kind of person, right enough. He began telling her the story of his married life, but curiously enough she appeared to know the essential parts of it already. She described to him, almost as though she had seen or felt it, the stiffening of Catherine's body as soon as he touched her, the way in which she still seemed to be pushing him from her with all of her strength, even with her arms clasped tightly around him. With Julia he felt no difficulty in talking about such things. Catherine, in any case, had long ceased to be a painful memory and became merely a distasteful one. "I could have stood for it if it hadn't been for one thing," he said. He told her about the frigid little ceremony that Catherine had forced him to go through on the same night every week. She hated it, but nothing would make her stop doing it. She used to call it, but you'll never guess. "Our duty to the party," said Julia promptly. How do you know that?" I've been at school too, dear. Sex talks once a month for over 16s, and in the youth movement, they rub it into you for years. I dare say it works in a lot of cases. But of course, you can never tell. People are such hypocrites. Yeah, you're talking to one. She began to enlarge upon the subject. With Julia, everything came back to her own sexuality. As soon as this was touched upon in any way, she was capable of great acuteness. Unlike Winston, she had grasped the inner meaning of the party's sexual puritanism. It was not merely that the sex instinct created a world of its own, which was outside the party's control, and which therefore had to be destroyed if possible. What was more important was that sexual privatation induced hysteria, which was desirable because it could be transformed into war fever and leader worship. The way she put it was, when you make love, you're using up energy, and afterwards you feel happy and you don't give a damn for anything. They can't bear you to feel like that. They want you to be bursting with energy all the time. All this marching up and down and cheering and waving flags is simply sex gone sour. If you're happy inside yourself, why should you get excited about Big Brother and the 3-year plan and the 2-minute hit and all the rest of their bloody rot? That was very true, he thought. There was a direct, intimate connection between chastity and political orthodoxy. I think I'd call that to be true. I'm pretty sure I'd call that to be true. Because there are a lot of people out there, incels, that would rather stand for a party or an idea than to, I don't know, talk to people, be intimate, let loose. It's not hard. Well, that's the problem for a minute. It's not hard. They need to be hard for it to work. For how could the fear, the hatred, and the lunatic credulity which the party needed in its members be kept at the right pitch, except by bottling down some powerful instinct and using it as a driving force? The sex impulse was dangerous to the party, and the party had turned it into account. They had played a similar trick with the instinct of parenthood. I believe this is air talking. Is it? Nope, no one's talking. The family could not actually be abolished, and indeed people were encouraged to be fond of their children in almost the old-fashioned way. The children, on the other hand, were systematically turned against their parents and taught to spy on them and report their deviations. The family had become, in effect, an extension of the thought police. It was a device by means of which everyone could be surrounded night and day by informers who knew him intimately. Abruptly, his mind went back to Catherine. Catherine would unquestionably have denounced him to the thought police if she had not happened to be too stupid to detect the unorthodoxy of his opinions. But what really recalled her to him at this moment was the stifling heat of the afternoon, which had brought the sweat out on his forehead. He began telling Julia of something that had happened, or rather had failed to happen, on another sweltering summer afternoon 11 years ago. It was 3 or 4 months after they were married. They had lost their way on a community hike somewhere in Kent. They had only lagged behind the others for a couple of minutes, but they took a wrong turning and presently found themselves pulled up short by the edge of an old chalk quarry. It was a sheer drop of 10-20 metres, with boulders at the bottom. There was nobody of whom they could ask the way. As soon as they realised that they were lost, Catherine became very uneasy. To be away from the noisy mob of hikers, even for a moment, gave her a feeling of wrongdoing. She wanted to hurry back by the way they had come and start searching in the other direction. But at this moment Winston noticed some tufts of loose tripe growing in the cracks of the cliff beneath them. One tuft was of two colours, magenta and brick red, apparently growing in the same root. He had never seen anything of this kind before, and he called Catherine to come and look at it. "Look, Catherine! Look! Look at these flowers! That clump down there near the bottom. Do you see the two different colours?" But she's already turned to go. But she did rather fretfully come back for a moment. She even leaned over the cliff face to see where he was pointing. He was standing a little behind her, and he put his hand on her waist to steady her. At this moment it suddenly occurred to him how completely alone they were. There was not a human creature anywhere, not a leaf stirring, not even a bird awake. In a place like this, the danger that there would be a hidden microphone was very small. And even if there was a microphone, it would only pick up sounds. It was the hottest, sleepiest hour of the afternoon. The sun blazed down upon them, the sweat tickled his face, and the thought struck him. "Why didn't you give her a good shove?" said Julia. "I would have." "Yeah, dear, you would have. I would, if I'd have been the same person as I am now, or perhaps I would. I'm not certain. Are you sorry you didn't?" "Yeah. On the whole, I'm sorry I didn't." They were sitting side by side on the dusty floor. He pulled her closer against him. Her head rested on his shoulder, and the pleasant smell of her hair conquering the pigeon dung. Okay. She was very young, he thought. She still expected something from life. She did not understand that to push an inconvenient person over a cliff solves nothing. "Actually, it would have made no difference," he said. "Then why are you sorry you didn't do it?" "Well, only because I prefer a positive to a negative. In this game that we're playing, we can't win. Some kinds of failure are better than other kinds, that's all." He felt her shoulders give a wriggle of dissent. She always contradicted him when he said anything of this kind. She would not accept it as a law of nature that the individual is always defeated. In a way, she realized that she herself was doomed. The sooner or later the thought police would catch her and kill her. But with another part of her mind, she believed that she was somehow possible to construct a secret world in which you could live as you choose. All you needed was luck and cunning and boldness. She did not understand that there was no such thing as happiness, that the only victory lay in the far future, long after you were dead, that from the moment of declaring war on the party, it was better to think of yourself as a corpse. "We are the dead," he said. It's at the end of a chapter. "Oh, we're not dead yet," said Julia, prosaically. 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 Got it. "We're not dead yet," said Julia, prosaically. "Not physically. 6 months, a year, 5 years, conceivably. I'm not afraid of death." "You are young, so presumably you're more afraid of it than I am. Obviously we shall put it off as long as we can, but it makes very little difference. So long as human beings stay human, death and life are the same thing." "Ah, rubbish. Which would you sooner sleep with, me or a skeleton? Don't you enjoy being alive? Don't you like feeling? This is me. This is my hand. This is my leg. I'm real. I'm solid. I'm alive. Don't you like this?" You can imagine she stands there and does like the whole demonstration thing, can't you? She twisted herself around and pressed her bosom against him. He could feel her breasts ripe yet firm through her overalls. Her body seemed to be pouring some of its youth and vigour into his. "Yes, I like that," he said. "And stop talking about dying, and I'll listen, dear. We've got to fix up about the next time we meet. We may as well go back to the place in the wood. We've given it a good long rest, but you must get there by a different way this time. I've got it all planned out. You take the train, but look, I'll draw it out for you." And in her practical way, she scraped together a small square of dust with a twig from a pigeon's nest and began drawing a map upon the floor. Oh, this is a new chapter. I was close. I was a page out. All right. So before I go for the next chapter, I'm going to put on a song and I'm going to run away. Because I don't know how long it's been, so it's been long though, right? Half an hour. Perfect. That was an interesting little break. Ooh, page 180. Winston looked around the shabby little room above Mr. Charrington's shop. So if you remember rightly, I'm sat in my chair wrong now. I'll stop it squeaking. So if you remember rightly, Mr. Charrington's shop, that's the guy who we bought the book from, and then he showed him a room upstairs, and he's decided to, I believe, rent the room upstairs. And then he's just going to hang around up there because he likes the idea of being in that room with a chair and a fireplace. He wants that. So he's going there. This is what he's thinking about. Let's remember that. And beside the window, the enormous bed was made up, with ragged blankets and coverless bolster. The old-fashioned clock with the 12-hour face was ticking away on the mantelpiece. In the corner, on the gate-leg table, sorry, the glass paperweight which he had bought on his last visit gleamed softly out of the half-darkness. In the fender was a battered tin oil stove, a saucepan, and 2 cups, provided by Mr. Carrington. I'm going to say that. Winston lit the burner and set a pan of water to boil. He had brought an envelope full of Victory coffee and some saccharine tablets. The clock's hand said 17:20. It was 19:20 really. She was coming at 19:30. Oh, wow, you've invited her in. Okay. Folly, folly, his heart kept saying. Conscious, gratuitous, suicidal folly. Of all the crimes that a party member could commit, this one was the least possible to conceal. Actually, the idea had first floated into his head in the form of a vision of the glass paperweight mirrored by the surface of the gate-leg table. As he had foreseen, Mr. Carrington had made no difficulty about letting the room. He was obviously glad of a few dollars that it would bring him, nor did he seem shocked or become offensively knowing when it was made clear that Winston wanted the room for the purpose of a love affair. Instead, he looked into the middle distance and spoke in generalities, with so delicate an air as to give the impression that he had become partly invisible. Privacy, he said, was a very valuable thing. Everyone wanted a place where they could be alone occasionally. And when they had such a place, it was only common courtesy in anyone else who they knew of it to keep his knowledge to himself. He even, seemingly, almost to fade out of existence. As he did so, added that there were 2 entries to the house, one of them through the backyard, which gave on an alley. Under the window, somebody was singing. That's it, that's a full sentence. Under the window, someone was singing. Winston peeped out, secure in the protection of the muslin curtain. The June sun was still high in the sky, and in the sun-filled court below, a monstrous woman, solid as a Norman pillar, with brawny red forearms and a sacking apron strapped about her middle, was stumping to and fro between a wash tub and clothesline, pegging out a series of square white things which Winston recognised as baby's diapers. Nappies. I'm going to say nappies. Whenever her mouth was not corked with clothes pegs, she was singing in a powerful contralto. It was only an hopeless fancy. It passed like an April day. But I look, and a word and a dreams they stirred. They have stolen my heart awry. There you can see. I actually speak that language, so there you go. The tune had been haunting London for weeks past. It was one of countless similar songs published for the benefit of the proles by a subsection of the music department. Ooh, music department. That's clever. It's not clever. A music department is where you learn about music, not where music's fed to you. The words of these songs were composed without any human intervention whatever on an instrument known as a versificator, but the woman sang so tunefully as to turn the dreadful rubbish into an almost pleasant sound. You're welcome. Not a woman, but you're welcome. He could hear the woman singing, and the scrape of her shoes on the flagstones, and the cries of the children in the street, and somewhere in the far distance a faint roar of traffic, and yet the room seemed curiously silent, thanks to the absence of a telescreen. Folly, folly, folly! He thought again. It was inconceivable that they could frequent this place for more than a few weeks without being caught, but the temptation of having a hiding place that was truly their own, indoors and near at hand, had been too much for both of them. For some time after their visit to the church at the Belfry, it had been impossible to arrange meetings. Working hours had been drastically increased in anticipation of Hate Week. It was more than a month distant, but the enormous complex preparations that it entailed were throwing extra work onto everybody. Finally, both of them managed to secure a free afternoon on the same day. They had agreed to go back to the clearing in the wood. On the evening beforehand, they met briefly in the street, as usual. Winston hardly looked at Julia as they drifted towards one another in the crowd, but from the short glance he gave her, it seemed to him that she was paler than usual. "Zoloff," she murmured as soon as she judged it safe to speak. "Tomorrow, I mean." "What? What? Oh, no, don't lay him off now. Don't lay him off now. Oh, tomorrow afternoon I can't come. Why not?" "Oh, the usual reason. We started early this time." "Okay, thanks." For a moment he was violently angry. During the month that he had known that her nature of his desire for her had changed. At the beginning there, he had a little true sensuality in it. The first love Their first love making had been simply an act of the will, but after the second time it was different. The smell of her hair, the taste of her mouth, the feeling of her skin seemed to have got inside him, or into the air all around him. She had become a physical necessity, something that he not only wanted but felt like he had a right to. When she said that she could not come, he had the feeling that she was cheating him. But just at this moment, the crowd pressed them together and their hands accidentally met. She gave the tips of his fingers a quick squeeze that seemed to invite not desire but affection. It struck him that when one lived with a woman, this particular disappointment must be a normal recurring event, and deep tenderness, such as he had not felt for her before, suddenly took hold of him. He wished that they were a married couple of 10 years, standing. He wished that he were walking through the streets with her just as they were doing now, but openly and without fear, talking of trivialities and buying odds and ends for the household. He wished above all that they had some place where they could be alone together, without feeling the obligation to make love every time they met. "You gay? You gay?" Okay. It was not actually at that moment, but at some time on the following day, the idea of renting Mr. Charrington's room had occurred to him. When he suggested it to Julia, she had agreed with unexpected readiness. Both of them knew it was a lunacy. It was as though they were intentionally stepping nearer their graves. As he sat waiting on the edge of the bed, he thought again of the cellars of the Ministry of Love. It was curious how the predestined horror moved in and out of one's consciousness. There it lay, fixed in future times, preceding death as surely as 99 precedes 100. One could not avoid it, but one perhaps postpone it. And yet instead, every now and again, by a conscious willful act, one chose to shorten the interval before it even happened. At this moment there was a quick step on the stairs. Julia burst into the room. She was carrying a tool bag of coarse brown canvas, such as he had sometimes seen her carrying to and fro at the ministry. He started forward to take her in her arms, but she disengaged herself rather hurriedly, partly because she was still holding the tool bag. "Half a second," she said. "Just let me show you what I've brought. Did you bring that filthy Victory coffee?" "I thought you would. You can chuck it away again, because you won't be needing it. Look here." She fell on her knees, throwing open the bag, and tumbled out some spanners and a screwdriver that filled the top part of it. Underneath were a number of neat paper packets. The first packet she passed to Winston had a strange and yet vaguely familiar feeling. It was filled with some kind of heavy, sand-like stuff which yielded wherever you touched it. "It isn't sugar," he said. "Oh, it's fucking coffee. It's coffee. Real sugar, not saccharin. It's sugar. It's actually sugar. And here's a loaf of bread, proper white bread, not our bloody stuff. And a little pot of jam. And here's a tin of milk. But look, this is what I'm proud of. And I had to wrap a bit of saccharin around it because," and she didn't need to tell him why she had wrapped it up, because the smell was already filling the room. That rich hot smell, which seemed like an emanation from his early childhood. but which one did occasionally meet with even now, blowing down a passageway before a door slammed, or diffusing it mysteriously in a crowded street, sniffed for an instant and then lost again. It's coffee, he murmured. Real coffee? You ain't a party coffee. There's a whole kilo here, she said. Kilo? That's not bad. How did you manage to get a hold of these things? Ah, it's all in a party stuff. There's nothing those swan don't have. Nothing. But of course, waiters and servants, people pinch things. And look, I got a little packet of tea as well. I like you, Julia. Winston had squatted down beside her. He tore open the corner of the packet. It's real tea. It's not blackberry leaves. Ah, there's been a lot of tea about lately. They've captured India or something, she said vaguely. But listen, dear, I want you to turn your back on me for 3 minutes. Go and sit on the other side of the bed. Don't go too near the window, and don't turn round till I tell you. Winston gazed abstractedly through the muslin curtain. Down in the yard, red-armed woman was still marching to and fro between the washtub and the lawn. She took 2 more pegs out of her mouth and sang with a deep feeling. They say that time heals all things. They say that you can always forget, but the smiles and the tears across the years, they twist my ear heartstrings. There you go, see? That's what that is. She knew the whole drivelling song by heart, it seemed. Her voice floated upward with a sweet summer air. Sweat summer air? Bit uncomfortable. Very tuneful, charged with a sort of happy melancholy. One had this feeling that she would have been perfectly content if the June evening had been endless and the supply of clothes in it inexhaustible, to remain there for 1,000 years, pegging out diapers and singing rubbish. It struck him as a curious fact that he had never heard a member of the party singing alone and spontaneously. It would have seemed slightly unorthodox, a dangerous eccentricity, like talking to oneself. Am I doing that? Am I talking to myself? Let's hope the thought police don't find me. Perhaps it was only when people were somewhere near the starvation level that they had anything to sing about. You can turn round now, said Julia. He turned round and for a second almost failed to recognise her. What he had actually expected was to see her naked, but she was not naked. The transformation that had happened was much more surprising. It's a dude. I'm kidding. I said it was a dude at the start. I said that at the start. I was joking. I don't want that to be true. She had painted her face. Okay, she must have slipped into some shop in the proletarian quarters and bought herself a complete set of makeup and materials. Her lips were deeply red and her cheeks roughed, her nose powdered. There was even a touch of something under the eyes to make them brighter. It was not very skillfully done, but Winston's standards in such matters were not high. Yeah, I'd say so. He had never before seen or imagined a woman of the party with cosmetics on her face. The improvement in her appearance was startling. Let's not say that out loud, though, yeah? With just a few dabs of colour in the right places, she had become not only very much prettier, but above all, far more feminine. I knew she was a dude. Her short hair and boyish overalls merely added to the effect. As he took her in his arms, a wave of synthetic violets flooded his nostrils. He remembered the half-darkness of a basement kitchen and a woman's cavernous mouth. Oh, God, that... Oh, thank you. It was the very same scent that she had used. Oh, you poor sod. Oh, you poor sod. But at that moment, it did not seem to matter. Oh, that's good. Scent too, he said. A little bit. Yes, dear, scent too. Do you know what I'm going to do next? Oh, you bet. I'm going to get a hold of a real woman's frock. I knew it was a guy's frock. From somewhere and wear it instead of these bloody trousers. You've wrapped your trousers round yourself. You put yourself into a leg. Is that what you've done? I'll wear silk stockings and high-heeled shoes in this room. I'm going to be a woman, not a party comrade. They flung their clothes up and climbed into the huge mahogany bed. It was the first time that he had stripped himself naked in her presence. Until now, he had been too much ashamed of his pale, meagre body, with the varicose veins standing out on his calves and the discoloured patch over his ankle. There was no sheets, but the blanket they lay on was threadbare and smooth. That's nice. And the size and springiness of the bed astonished them both. It's sure to be full of bugs. Who cares? Said Julia. One never saw a double bed nowadays, except in the homes of the proles. Winston had occasionally slept in one in his boyhood. Julia had never been in one before, so as far as she could remember. That was the end of a sentence, by the way. Just saying. Presently they fell asleep for a little while. When Winston woke up, the hands of the clock had crept around to nearly 9. He did not stir because Julia was sleeping with her head in the crook of his arm. Most of her makeup had transferred itself to his own face or the bolster, but a light stain of rouge still brought out the beauty of her cheekbone. A yellow ray from the sinking sun fell across the foot of the bed and lighted up the fireplace, where the water in the pan was boiling fast. Down in the yard, the woman had stopped singing, but the faint shouts of children floated in from the street. It's only been a few minutes. He wondered vaguely whether in the abolished past it had been a novel experience to lie in bed like this, in the cool of a summer evening, a man and a woman with no clothes on, making love when they chose, talking of what they chose, not feeling any compulsion to get up, simply lying there and listening to the peaceful sounds of outside. Surely there could have been a time when that seemed ordinary. Julia woke up and rubbed her eyes and raised herself on her elbow to look at the oil stove. Half that water's boiled already? Half of it? You mean it's boiled away? She don't read, it's not her fault. She said, I'll get up and make some coffee in another moment. We've got an hour. What time do they cut the lights off at your flats? 20:33. It's 20:33 at the hostel. But you have to get in earlier than that. Because, hi, get out, you filthy brute. What? She suddenly twisted herself over the bed, seized a shoe from the floor, and sent it hurling into the corner with a boyish jerk of her arm, exactly as he had seen her flinging the dictionary at Goldstein that morning during the 2-minute hit. What was it? He said in surprise. A rat! I saw him stick his beastly nose out of the wainscoting. There's a hole down there. I gave him a good fright anyway. Rats, murmured Winston. In this room? Ah, they're all over the place, said Julia, indifferently, as she lays down again. We've even got them in the kitchen at the hostel. Some parts of London are swarming with them. Did you know they attack children? Yes, they do. In some of the streets, a woman daren't have a baby alone for 2 minutes. It's the great huge brown ones that do it, though. And the nasty thing is the brutes always... Don't go on, said Winston, with his eyes tightly shut. Dearest, you've gone quite pale. What's the matter? Do they make you feel sick? Of all the horrors in the world, a rat. Ugh. She pressed herself against him and wound her limbs around him, as though to reassure him with the warmth of her body. He did not reopen his eyes immediately. For several moments he had the feeling of being back in a nightmare which had reoccurred from time to time throughout his life. It's always very much the same. He's standing in front of a wall of darkness, and on the other... I guess who knows? And that's where the story ends, I guess. But I'm not evil, so I think I might continue. It's not going to work if I don't drink, though. What do you think's on the other side of that wall? Rats? I mean, context clues. You think it's rats? I think it's rats. On the other side of it, there was something unendurable, something too dreadful to be faced. In the dream, his deepest feeling was always one of self-deception, because he did in fact know what was behind the wall of darkness. With a deadly effort, like wrenching a piece out of his own brain, he could even have dragged the thing up into the open. He always woke up without discovering what it was, but somehow it was connected with what Julia had been saying when he cut her short. I'm sorry, he said. It's nothing. I just don't like rats, that's all. I wonder what's on the other side of that wall. Ooh. Don't worry, dear. We're not going to have filthy brutes in here. I'll stuff the hole with a bit of sacking before we go, and the next time we come here, I'll bring some plaster and bung it up properly. She's a dude. She's just fucking fixing shit. She's a guy. She's a man. Already the black Already the black instant of panic was half forgotten. Feeling slightly ashamed of himself, he sat up against the bedhead. Julia got out of bed, pulled on her overalls, and made the coffee. The smell that rose from the saucepan was so powerful and exciting that they shut the window lest anybody outside should notice and become inquisitive. Can we have a cup? No. Man. It's my coffee. What was even better than the taste of coffee was the silky texture given to it by the sugar, a thing Winston had almost forgotten after years of saccharin. But with one hand in her pocket and a piece of bread and jam in the other, Julia wandered about the room, glancing indifferently at the bookcase, pointing out the best way of repairing the gate-leg table, plumping herself down on the ragged armchair to see if it was comfortable, and examining the absurd 12-hour clock with a sort of tolerant amusement. She brought the glass paperweight over to the bedhead to have a good look at it in a better light. He took it out of her hand, fascinated as always by the soft rainwatery appearance of the glass. "What is it, do you think?" said Julia. "I don't think it's anything. I mean, I don't think it was ever put to any use. That's what I like about it. It's a little chunk of history that they've forgotten to alter. It's a message from 100 years ago if one knew how to read it. And that picture over here," she nodded at the engraving on the opposite wall. It's engraved in steel, by the way. "Would that be 100 years old?" "More, 200, I dare say. One can't tell. It's impossible to discover the age of anything nowadays." She went over to look at it. Here's where that brute stuck his nose out," she said, kicking the wainscoting immediately below the picture. "What is this place? I've seen it before somewhere." "It's a church, or at least it used to be. St. Clement Danes, its name was." The fragment of rhyme that Mr. Charrington had taught him came back into his head, and he added, half nostalgically, "Oranges and lemons, hear the bells of St. Clement's." And to astonishment, she capped the line, "You owe me 3 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's. When will you pay me, say the bells of Old Bailey." I can't remember how it goes on after that, but anyway. I remember it ends up, "Here comes a candle to light you to bed. Here comes a chopper to chop off your head." It was like the 2 halves of a countersign, but there must be another line after the bells of Old Bailey. Perhaps it could be dug out of Mr. Charrington's memory, if he were suitably prompted. "Who taught you that?" he said. "Oh, my grandfather. He used to say it to me when I was a little girl. He was vaporized when I was 8, at any rate. He disappeared. I wonder what a lemon was," she added inconsequently. "I've seen oranges. They're a kind of round yellow fruit with a thick skin." I can remember lemons," said Winston. "They were quite common in the 50s. They were so sour that it set your teeth on edge even to smell them." "I bet that picture's got bugs behind it," said Julia. "I'll take it down and give it a good clean some day. I suppose it's almost time we were leaving. I must start washing this paint off. What a bore. I'll get the lipstick off your face afterwards." Winston did not get up for a few minutes more. The room was darkening. He turned over towards the light and lay gazing into the glass paperweight. The inexhaustibly interesting thing was not that the fragment of coral, but the interior of the glass itself. There was such depth of it, and yet it was almost as transparent as air. It was as though the surface of the glass had been the arch of the sky enclosing a tiny world, with its atmosphere complete. He had the feeling that he could get inside it, and that in fact he was in it, along with the mahogany bed and the gate-leg table and the clock and the steel engraving and the paperweight itself. Told you it was steel. The paperweight was the room he was in, and the coral was Julia's life and his own, fixed in a sort of eternity at the heart of the crystal. I believe we're on chapter 5. Look at that! Oh, Sam's back. Are you fucking kidding me? Alright, Sam. What you got for us? This is going to be interesting. So, as far as we've got now, protagonist found a girlfriend. Originally, he vividly saw himself murdering the fuck out of her. That's what he's seen. And then he meets up with her. They end up meeting. She says she loves him. First thing she says. That's how they meet. And then they agree to meet in person somewhere. They do that in secret. Successfully, without being found. And then eventually, after a bunch of other meetings, and he's basically learning how to do things her way. Her piece of advice basically is overdo it in the ministry. So go to the meetings, go to the extracurricular stuff, go to everything else. And then when it comes time for you doing the little stuff, no one's going to give a fuck because you're putting in too much anyway. It's like, oh, he's the guy who does all that stuff and he stays in time in that bookshop. Whatever. But it's like, he only does his work and disappears. What's he doing in that bookshop? Instead of that question. Now he's got an alibi, or at least a motive, or something else. Something that's putting other people off of the scent. And now they've just been contemplating what it is to be lovers in this world and what it was like in the old world. What else are we looking at? I am unsure. No, it's been an hour now, yeah? Yeah, it's been an hour. Do 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 do. It's a shame that no one's suggesting any accents. There we go. I'll do it like that. There you go. You can see now. Sam had vanished. A morning came, and he was missing from work. Uh-oh. I think I like Sam. I don't think he should go missing. It's the dude beginning with P. He's the one who's a problem. A few thoughtless people commented on his absence. On the next day, nobody mentioned him. On the third day, Winston went into the vestibule of the records department to look at the notice board. One of the notices carried a printed list of the members of the chess committee, of whom Syme had been one. It looked almost exactly as it had looked before. Nothing had been crossed out, but it was one name shorter. It was enough. Sam had ceased to exist. He'd never existed. Bye, Sam. Sorry, mate. The weather was baking hot. In a labyrinthine ministry of the windowless, air-conditioned rooms kept their normal temperature, but outside the pavement scorched one's feet, and the stench of the tubes and the rush hours was the horror. The preparations for Hate Week were in full swing, and the staffs of all the ministries were working overtime. Processions, meetings, military parades, lectures, waxworks, displays, film shows, telescreen programs, all had to be organised. Stands had to be erected, effigies built, slogans coined, songs written, rumours circulated, photographs faked. Julia's unit in the fiction department had been taken off the production of novels and was rushing out a series of atrocity pamphlets. Winston, in addition to his regular work, spent long periods every day in going through back. I really wanted to take a drag, so that's why that stopped there. Wow, dystopias are much better when you're drunk. Going on through back files of the Times and altering and embellishing news items, which were to be quoted in speeches. Late at night, when the crowds of rowdy proles roamed the streets, the town had a curiously febrile air. Febrile? The rocket bombs crashed off The rocket bombs crashed oftener than ever. More often than ever. And sometimes in the far distance there were enormous explosions which no one could explain, and which about there were wild rumours. It's a good job I don't get paid to be doing this. The new tune, which was to be the theme song of Hate Week, the Hate Song it was called, had already been composed and was being endlessly plugged on the telescreens. It had a savage barking rhythm, which could not exactly be called music, but resembled the beating of a drum, roared out by hundreds of voices at the tramp of marching feet. It was terrifying. The pros had taken a fancy to it, and in the midnight streets it competed with the still popular It Was Only a Hopeless Fancy. The parson's children played it all hours of the night and day, unbearably, on a comb and a piece of toilet paper. Oh, God, no. Are you kidding me? That's awful. Oh, that's awful. Winston's evenings were fuller than ever. Squads of volunteers, organised by parsons, were preparing the street for Hate Week, stitching banners, painting posters, erecting flagstaffs on the roofs, and perilously slinging wires across the street for the reception of streamers. Thank you very much. I like how these people care. That's very nice of you. And this was in 1949. I didn't know I'd be doing this. It's very cool. Parsons boasted that Victory Mansions alone would display 400 metres of bunting. He was in his native element and as happy as a lark. The heat and the manual work had given him a pretext for reverting to shorts and an open shirt in the evenings. Because he likes doing that whenever he gets a bloody chance. He was everywhere at once, pushing, pulling, sawing, hammering, improvising, jollying everyone along with the comradely exhortations and giving out from every fold of his body what seemed to be an inexhaustible supply of acrid-smelling sweats. The new poster had suddenly appeared all over London. It had no caption, and represented simply the monstrous figure of a Eurasian soldier, 3 or 4 meters high, striding forward, with expressionless Mongolian face and enormous boots. A submachine gun pointed from his hip from whatever angle you looked at the poster. The muzzle of the gun, magnified by the foreshortening, seemed to be pointed straight at you. The thing had been plastered on every blank space on every wall, even outnumbering the portraits of Big Brother. The pros, normally apathetic about the war, were being lashed into one of their periodical frenzies of patriotism. As though to harmonise with the general mood, the rocket bombs had been killing larger numbers of people than usual. One fell on a crowded film theatre in Stepney, burying several hundred victims among the ruins. The whole population of the neighbourhood turned out for a long, trailing funeral, which went on for hours and was in effect an indignation meeting. Another bomb fell on a piece of waste ground, which was used as a playground, and several dozen children were blown to pieces. There were further angry demonstrations. Goldstein was buried in effigy. Hundreds of copies of the poster of the Eurasian soldier were torn down and added to the flames, and a number of shops were looted in the turmoil. Then the rumour flew around that spies were directing rocket bombs by means of wireless waves. And an old couple, that's what wireless wave, and an old couple were suspected of being foreign extraction, had their house set on fire and perished of suffocation. In the room over where Mr. Charrington's shop, when they could get there, Julia and Winston lay side by side on a stripped bed under the open window. Yeah, naked for the sake of coolness. The rat had never come back, but the bugs had multiplied hideously in the heat. It did not seem to matter, dirty or clean, the room was paradise. As soon as they arrived, they would sprinkle everything with pepper bought on the black market, tear off their clothes and make love with sweating bodies, then fall asleep and wake to find the bugs had rallied and were massing for the counter-attack. So as he's ploughing away, he's basically crushing bugs, and they're like, we don't like this. When you've finished fucking, we're gonna... there's a knee! What is that? What's going on? We'll get you back, Gadget. Is that what's happening? 4, 5, 6, 7 times they met during the month of June. Really? That's like once, twice a week. That's pretty decent. Well done. Winston had dropped his habit of drinking gin at all hours. He seemed to have lost the need for it. He had grown fatter, his varicose ulcer had subsided, leaving only a brown stain on the skin above his ankle. His fits of coughing in the early morning had stopped. The process of life had ceased to be intolerable. He had no longer any impulse to make faces at the telly screen or shout curses at the top of his voice. Now that they had secure hiding place, almost a home, it did not even seem a hardship that they could only meet infrequently and for a couple of hours at a time. What mattered was that the room over the junk shop should exist. To know that it was there, inviolate, was almost the same as being in it. The room was a world, a pocket of the past where extinct animals could walk. Mr. Charrington thought, I'm gonna say his name differently, bollocks to that. Thought Winston was another extinct animal. He usually stopped to talk with Mr. Carrington for a few minutes on his way upstairs. The old man seemed seldom or never go out of outdoors, and on the other hand to have almost no customers. He led a ghost-like existence between the tiny dark shop and even tinier back kitchen, where he prepared his meals and which contained, among other things, an unbelievably ancient gramophone with an enormous horn. He seemed glad of the opportunity to talk, wondering about among his worthless stock, with his long nose and thick spectacles, his broad shoulders in the velvet jacket. He had always vaguely in the air of being a collector rather than a tradesman. With a sort of faded enthusiasm, he would finger this scrap of rubbish or that, a china bottle stopper, the painted lid of a broken snuff box, a pinched beck locket containing a strand with some long dead baby's hair, never asking that Winston should buy it, merely that he should admire it. To talk to him was like listening to the tinkling of a worn-out musical box. He had dragged out from the corners of his memory some more fragments of forgotten rhymes. There was one about 24 blackbirds, and another about a cow with a crumpled horn, and another about a death of poor-cock robin. It just occurred to me that you might be interested, he would say with a deprecating little laugh, whenever he produced a new fragment, but he could never recall more than a few lines of any one rhyme. Both of them knew, in a way, it was never out of their minds that what was now happening, could not last long. There were times when the fact of impending death seemed as palpable as the bed they lay on. They would cling together with a sort of despairing sensuality, like a damned soul grasping at the last morsel of pleasure, when the clock is within 5 minutes of striking. But there was also times when they had the illusion that not only of safety, but of permanence. So long as they were actually in this room, they both felt no harm could come to them. Getting there was difficult and dangerous, but the room itself was sanctuary. It was as when Winston had gazed into the heart of the paperweight, with the feeling that it would be possible to get inside the glassy world, and that once inside it time could be arrested. Often they gave themselves up to the daydreams of escape. Their luck would hold indefinitely, and they would carry on their intrigue just like this, for the remainder of their natural lives. Or Catherine would die, and by subtle manoeuvrings, Winston and Julia would succeed in getting married. Or they would commit suicide together, or they would disappear, alter themselves out of recognition, learn to speak with proletarian accents, get jobs in factory, and live out their lives undetected in a back street. It was all nonsense, as they both knew. In reality, there was no escape. Even the one plan that was practical suicide, they had no intention of carrying out. To hang on from day to day and from week to week, spinning out a present that had no future, seemed to be an unconquerable instinct. Just as one's lungs will always draw the next breath so long as there is air available. Sometimes, too, they talked of engaging in active rebellion against the party, but with no notion of how to take the first step. Even if the fabulous brotherhood was a reality, there still remained a difficulty in finding one's way into it. He told her of the strange intimacy that existed, or seemed to exist, between himself and O'Brien, and of the impulse he sometimes felt simply to walk into O'Brien's presence, announce that he was the enemy of the party, and demand his help. Curiously enough, this did not strike her as an impossibly rash thing to do. She was used to judging people by their faces, and it seemed natural to her that Winston would believe O'Brien to be trustworthy on the strength of a single flash of the eyes. I won't be too sure he wanted to kill you when he saw you, so let's just leave it at that. Let's not trust this man so fast. Pieces at a time, lady. Come on. Moreover, she took it for granted that everyone, or nearly everyone, secretly hated the party and would break the rules if he thought it safe to do so. But she refused to believe that widespread organised opposition existed or could exist. The tales about Goldstein and his underground army, she said, were simply a lot of rubbish which the party had invented for its own purposes and which you had to pretend to believe in. Times beyond number at party rallies and spontaneous demonstrations, she had shouted at the top of her voice for the execution of people whose names she had never heard and whose supposed crimes she had not faintest belief. When the public trials were happening, she had taken her place in the detachments from the Youth League, who surrounded the courts from morning to night, chanting at intervals, "Death to the traitors." During the 2 minutes hit, she always excelled all others in shouting insults at Goldstein. Yet she had only the dimmest idea of who Goldstein was and what doctrines he was supposed to represent. She had grown up since the Revolution and was too young to remember the ideological battles of the 50s and 60s. Such a thing as an independent political movement was outside her imagination. And in any case, the party was invincible. It would always exist, and it would always be the same. You could only rebel against it by secret disobedience or, most, by isolated acts of violence such as killing somebody or blowing something up. In some ways, she was far more acute than Winston, and far less susceptible to party propaganda. Once, when he happened in some connection to mention the war against Eurasia, she startled him by saying casually that in her opinion the war was not happening. The rocket bombs which fell daily on London were probably fired by the government of Oceania itself, just to keep the people frightened. This was an idea that literally never occurred to him. She also stirred a sort of envy in him by telling him that during the 2 minutes hit, her great difficulty was to avoid bursting out laughing. But she only questioned the teachings of the party when they in some way touched upon her own line. Often she was ready to accept the official mythology, simply because the difference between truth and falsehood did not seem important to her. She believed, for instance, having learnt it in school, that the party had invented aeroplanes. In his own school days, Winston remembered that the late 50s it was only the helicopter that the party had claimed to invent. A dozen years later, when Julia was at school, it was already claiming the aeroplane. One generation more, it would be claiming the steam engine. And then and when he told her that aeroplanes had been in existence before he was born, and long before the Revolution, the fact struck her as totally uninteresting. After all, what did it matter who invented aeroplanes? You know what I said, bollocks to that. It was rather more of a shock to him when he discovered from some chance remark that she did not remember that Oceania, 4 years ago, had been at war with East Asia and at peace with Eurasia. It was true that she regarded the whole war as a sham, but apparently she had not even noticed that the name of the enemy had changed. "I thought we've always been at war with Eurasia," she said, vaguely. It frightened him a little. The invention of aeroplanes dated from long before her birth. But the switch over in war happened only 4 years ago, well after she was grown up, and he argued with her about it for perhaps a quarter of an hour. In the end, he succeeded in forcing her memory back until he did dimly recall that at one time East Asia, not Eurasia, had been the enemy. But the issue still struck her as unimportant. "Who cares?" she said impatiently. "It's always one bloody war after another, and one knows the news is all lies anyway." Sometimes he talked to her of the records department and impudent forgeries that he committed there. Such things did not appear to horrify her. She did not feel the abyss opening beneath her at the thought of lies becoming truths. He told her of the story of Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, and the momentous slip of paper which he had once between his fingers. It did not make much impression on her at first. Indeed, she failed to grasp the point of the story. "Were they friends of yours?" she said. "No, never knew them. They were inner party members. Besides, they were far older men than I was. They belonged to the old days, before the Revolution. I barely knew them by sight." "Then what was there to worry about? People are being killed off all the time, aren't they?" He tried to make her understand that this was an exceptional case. It wasn't just a question of somebody being killed. Do you realise that the past, starting from yesterday, has been actually abolished? If it survives anywhere, it's in a few solid objects with no words attached to them, like that lump of glass there. Already, we know almost literally nothing about the revolution and the years before the revolution. Every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book has been rewritten. Every picture been repainted. Every statue and street building has been renamed. Every date has been altered. And that process is continuing day by day, minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. I know, of course, that the past is falsified, but it would never be possible for me to prove it. Even when I did the falsification myself, after the thing is done, no evidence ever remains. The only evidence is inside my own mind, and I don't know with any certainty that any other human being shares my memories. Just in that one instance in my whole life, I did possess actual, concrete evidence after the event, years after it. Yeah, and what good was it? It was no good, because I threw it away a few minutes later, but if the same thing happened today, I should keep it. Well, I wouldn't, said Julia. I'm quite ready to take risks, but only for something worthwhile, not for bits of old newspaper. What could you have done with it even if you had kept it? Not much, perhaps, but it was evidence. It might have planted a few doubts here and there, supposing that I'd dared to show it to anybody. I don't imagine that we can alter anything in our own lifetime, but one can imagine little knots of resistance springing up here and there, small groups of people banding themselves together, and gradually growing, and even leaving a few records behind so that the next generation can carry on where we leave off. I'm not interested in the next generation, dear. I'm interested in us. You're only a rebel from the waist downwards, he told her. She thought this brilliantly witty and flung her arms around him in delight. In the ramifications of party doctrine, she had not the faintest interest. Whenever he began to talk of the principles of Ingsoc, doublethink, mutability of the past, and the denial of objective reality, and the use of newspeak words, she became bored and confused, and said that she never paid any attention to that kind of thing. One knew that it was all rubbish, so why let oneself be worried by it? She knew when to cheer and when to boo, and that was all one needed. If he persisted in talking of such subjects, she had a disconcerting habit of falling asleep. I bet she does. She was one of those people who can go to sleep at any hour and in any position. Talking to her, he realised how easy it was to present an appearance of orthodoxy while having no grasp whatever of what orthodoxy meant. That's pretty funny, I like that. In a way, the worldview of the party imposed itself most successfully on people incapable of understanding it. They could be made to accept the most flagrant violations of reality, because they never fully grasped the enormity of what was demanded of them, and were not sufficiently interested in public events to notice what was happening. That's a bit of a fucking kick in the teeth, don't you think? Just a little bit. I mean, that is what's going on. You spent the last 15 years or so ignoring what's going on with society, and then suddenly, oh, we've got problems. No, you've had those problems for a while now. They're bothering you. This is your problem now. The people that have known about it for ages, we don't care. We don't care anymore. We tried. It was like 6 years ago, something like that. I put up a video. It was funny. It was of a dude trying to defend some really, really stupid stuff. Nobody listened, no one paid attention, and then the idea spread anyway, and it just got worse and worse. But that's what you're doing. That's what you're doing. You're accepting flagrant violations of what reality is, and you're just letting it go by. You're just happening. What are you doing? You're crazy. You crazy people. By lack of understanding, they remained sane. They simply swallowed everything, and what they swallowed did them no harm, because it left no residue behind, just as a grain of corn will pass undigested through the body of a bird. Ooh, new chapter. Chapter 6. Alright. Off we go. Let's see what we get with chapter 6. It's happened at last. I shit myself. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I made that up. That's improv. Improv! The expected message had come. All his life, it seemed to him. He had been waiting for this to happen. He's got a colostomy bag. That's what's happened. Ah, the silence. Isn't it deafening? I'm gonna keep reading in a minute. I just want to smoke some more of this. I drink some more of this. And breathe some of this out. Okay, I'm done now. I'm done now. He was walking down the long corridor at the ministry, and he was almost at the spot where Julia had slipped the note into his hand when he became aware that someone larger than himself was walking just behind him. I'm kidding. The person, whoever it was, gave a small cough, evidently as a prelude to speaking. Winston stopped abruptly and turned. It was O'Brien. At last, they were face to face, and it seemed that his only impulse was to run away. His heart bounded violently. He would have been incapable of speaking. O'Brien, however, had continued forward in the same movement, laying a friendly hand for a moment on Winston's arm, so that the two of them were walking side by side. He began speaking with a peculiar grave courtesy that differentiated him from the majority of the inner party members. That's some good reading there. I had been hoping for an opportunity of talking to you. I think that's the voice I gave this guy. I imagine O'Brien as a big guy. He said, I was reading one of your newspeak articles. Have you tried the chips? I was reading one of your newspeak articles in the Times the other day. You take a scholarly interest in newspeak, I believe. Winston had recovered part of his self-possession. Hardly scholarly, he said. I'm only an amateur. It's not my subject. I've never had anything to do with the actual construction of the language. But you write it very elegantly. I almost said intelligently, said O'Brien. That's not only my own opinion. I was talking recently to a friend of yours who is certainly an expert. His name has slipped my memory for a moment. Ooh, slips. More food. Again, I imagine this guy's food, eating stuff. Sorry. Again, Winston's heart stirred painfully. It was inconceivable that this was anything other than a reference to Syme. But Syme was not only dead, he was abolished, an unperson. An unidentifiable reference to him would have been mortally dangerous. O'Brien's remark must obviously have been intended as a signal, a code word. By sharing a small act of thought crime, he turned the two of them into accomplices. They had continued to stroll slowly down the corridor, but now O'Brien halted. With the curious, disarming friendliness that he has always managed to put into the gesture, he resettled his spectacles on his nose. And then he looks at you like that, like a librarian about to fuck you. And then he went on. What I really intended to say was that in your article, I noticed that you use two words which have become obsolete. But they have only become obsolete so very recently. Have you seen the 10th edition of the Newspeak Dictionary? No, he said, Winston. I didn't think it had been issued yet. We're still using the 9th in the record department. The 10th edition is not due to appear for some months, I believe. But a few advanced copies have been circulated. I have one myself. It might be... slow down. It might be interesting to you to look at it. Perhaps. Very much so, said Winston, immediately seeing where this is going. Oh, this is tended. Yeah. Some of the new developments... Oh, sorry. Some of the new developments are most ingenious. I'm getting dry mouth. Give me a second here. This is a serious book. Let me read it seriously. Give me a second here. I can't get this. The word some, for some reason, I can't get it out. Some of the new developments are most ingenious. Now I'm wearing braces. That's incredible. The reduction in number. Fuck it. Offense. That's the point of the picture. I'm gonna stop reading now. I need a distraction. This is my distraction. Give me a second. No suggestions. He's gonna let me carry on with this fucking thing that I'm doing. Give me a suggestion. It's gonna be easier. I can't keep coming up with fucking voices and shit. So yeah, you've got until I finish this. You've got until I finish. Because otherwise I'm gonna have to keep doing that fat voice. It's basically Nixon if he had jowls. Well, you know, when he did have jowls. That's basically what it is. I'm smoking this now because it's almost gone. Don't be reading ahead. Don't cheat. Don't cheat. Let me read it. Alright, what time are we on? 7:30? 7:30. Beautiful. Some of the new developments are most ingenious. The reduction in the number of verbs. That is the point that will appeal to you, I think. Let me see. Shall I send a messenger to you with the dictionary? But I'm afraid I invariably forget anything of that kind. Perhaps you could pick it up at my flat for some time if that suited you. Well, let me give you my address. They were standing in front of a telescreen, somewhat absent-mindedly. O'Brien felt two of his pockets, then produced a small leather-covered notebook and a gold ink pencil. Immediately beneath the telescreen, in such a position that anyone who was watching at the other end of the instrument could read what he was writing, he scribbled an address, tore out the page, and handed it to Winston. I am usually at home in the evenings, he said. If not, my servant will give you the dictionary. All right. He was gone, leaving Winston holding the scrap of paper, which this time there was no need to conceal. Nevertheless, he carefully memorized what was written on it, and some hours later dropped it into the memory hole, along with a mass of other papers. They had been talking to one another for a couple of minutes at the most. There was only one meaning that the episode could possibly have. It had been contrived as a way of letting Winston know O'Brien's address. This was necessary because, except by direct inquiry, it was never possible to discover where anyone lived. There was no directories of any kind. If you ever wanted to see me, this is where I can be found, was what O'Brien had been saying to him. That's why I did the voice. Perhaps there would even be a message concealed somewhere in the dictionary, but at any rate, one thing was certain. The conspiracy that he had dreamed of did exist, and he had reached the outer edges of it. He knew that sooner or later he would obey Brian's summons. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps after a long delay. He was not certain. What was happening was only the working out of a process that had started years ago. The first step had been a secret, involuntary thought. The second had been the opening of the diary. He had moved from thoughts to words, and now from words to actions. The last step was something that would happen in the ministry of love. He had accepted it. The end was contained in the beginning, but it was frightening. Or more exactly, it was like a foretaste of death, like being a little less alive. Even while he was speaking to O'Brien, when the meaning of the words had sunk in, a chilly, shuddering feeling had taken possession of his body. He had the sensation of stepping into the dampness of a grave. And it was not much better, because he had always known the grave was there and waiting for him. Ooh, chapter 7, we're on 7. Doing well, doing well. Does vodka make you itchy? Vodka makes me itchy for some reason. Maybe I should eat some food. Winston had woken up with his eyes full of tears. Julia rolled sleepily against him, murmuring something that might have been, "What's the matter?" "I dreamt," he began, and stopped short. It was too complex to be put into words. There was the dream itself, and then there was the memory connected with it that had swum into his mind in the few seconds after waking. He lay back with his eyes shut, still sodden with the atmosphere of the dream. It was a vast, luminous dream, in which his whole life seemed to stretch out before him like a landscape on a summer evening after rain. It had all occurred inside a glass paperweight, but the surface of the glass was the dome of the sky, and inside the dome everything was flooded with clear soft light, in which one could see into the interminable distances. The dream had also been comprehended by, indeed, in some sense it had consisted in a gesture of the arm made by his mother, and made again 30 years later by the Jewish woman he had seen on the news film, trying to shelter the small boy from the bullets before the helicopters blew them both to pieces. "Do you know," he said, "that until this moment I believed I had murdered my mother." "Why did you murder her?" said Julia, almost asleep. "Oh, okay. Why'd you murder her?" "I didn't murder her, not physically." In the dream he had remembered his last glimpse of his mother, and within a few moments of waking, the cluster of small events surrounding it had all come back. It was a memory that he must have deliberately pushed out of his consciousness over many years. He was not certain of the date, but he could not have been less than 10 years old, possibly 12, when it had happened. His father had disappeared some time earlier. How much earlier he could not remember. He remembered better the rackety, uneasy circumstances of the time, the periodical panics about air raids and sheltering in tube stations, the piles of rubble everywhere, the unintelligible proclamations posted at street corners, the gangs of youths in shirts all the same colour, the enormous queues outside the bakeries, the intermittent machine gun fire in the distance, above all, the fact that there was never enough to eat. He remembered long afternoons spent with other boys in scrounging round dustbins and rubbish heaps, picking out the ribs of cabbage leaves, potato peelings, sometimes even scraps of stale bread crust from which they carefully scraped away the cinders, and also in waiting for the passing of trucks which travelled over certain routes and were known to carry cattle feed, in which they could jolt it over the bad patches in the road, sometimes spilt a few fragments of oil cake. When his father disappeared, his mother did not show any surprise or any violent grief, but a sudden change came over her. She seemed to have become completely spiritless. It was evident to Winston that she was waiting for her husband. Something that she knew must happen, never mind. She did everything that was needed, cooked, washed, mended, made the bed, swept the floor, dusted the mantelpiece, always very slowly, and with a curious lack of superfluous motion, like an artist's lay figure moving of its own accord. Her large, shapely body seemed to relapse naturally into stillness. For hours at a time she would sit almost immobile on the bed, nursing his young sister, a tiny yearling, very silent child of 2 or 3, with a face made of simian by thinness. Very occasionally she would take Winston in her arms and press him against her for a long time, without saying anything. He was aware, in spite of his youthfulness and selfishness, that this was somehow connected with the never-mentioning thing that was about to happen. He remembered the room that they were where they lived, a dark, close-smelling room that seemed half filled by a bed with a white counterpane. Charlie in the Chocolate Factory? Maybe. There was a gas ring in the fender and a shelf where food was kept, and on the landing outside was a brown earthenware sink, common to several rooms. He remembered his mother's statuesque body bending over the gas ring to stare at something in a saucepan. Above all, he remembered his continuous hunger and the fierce, sordid battles at meal times. He would ask his mother naggingly over and over again why there was no more food. He would shout and storm at her. He even remembered the tones of his voice, which was beginning to break prematurely, and sometimes boomed him in a particular way. Or he would attempt a snivelling note of pathos in his efforts to get more than his share. His mother was quite ready to give him more than his share. She took it for granted that he, the boy, would have the biggest portion, but however much she gave him, he invariably demanded more. At every meal, she would beseech him not to be selfish and to remember that his little sister was sick and also needed food. But it was no use. He would cry out with rage when she stopped ladling. He would try to wrench the saucepan and spoon out of her hands. He would grab bits from his sister's plate. He knew that he was starving the other two, but he could not help it. He even felt that he had a right to do it. The clamorous hunger in his belly seems to justify him. Between meals, if his mother did not stand guard, he was constantly pilfering at the wretched store of food on the shelf. One day, a chocolate ration was issued. There had been no such issue for weeks or months past. He remembered quite clearly that precious little morsel of chocolate. It was a 2-ounce slab. They still talked about ounces in those days. Between the three of them, it was obvious that it ought to be divided between 3 equal parts. Suddenly, as though he were listening to somebody else, Winston heard himself demanding in a loud booming voice that he should be given the whole piece. His mother told him not to be greedy. There was a long nagging argument that went round and round, with shouts and whines and tears and remonstrances, that word, bargainings. His tiny sister, clinging to her mother with both hands, exactly like a baby monkey, sat looking over her shoulder with him, at him with large mournful eyes. In the end, his mother broke off 3/4 of the chocolate and gave it to Winston, giving the other quarter to his sister. The little girl took hold of it and looked at it dully, perhaps not knowing what it was. Winston stood watching her for a moment. Then, with a sudden swift spring, he had snatched a piece of chocolate out of his sister's hand and was fleeing for the door. Winston? Oh, Winston, his mother called after him. Oh, come back. Give your sister back her chocolate. He stopped, but he didn't come back. His mother's anxious eyes were fixed on his face. Even now he was thinking about the thing. He did not know what it was that was on the point of happening. His sister, conscious of having been robbed of something, had set up a feeble wail. His mother drew her arm around the child and pressed its face against her breast. Something in the gesture told him that his sister was dying. He turned and fled down the stairs, with the chocolate grain sticking in his hands. He never saw his mother again. After he devoured the chocolate, he felt somewhat ashamed of himself, and hung about in the streets for several hours until hunger drove him home. When he came back, his mother had disappeared. This was already becoming normal at the time. Nothing was gone from the room except his mother and his sister. They had not taken any clothes, not even his mother's overcoat. To this day he did not know with any certainty that his mother was dead. It was perfectly possible that she had merely been sent to a forced labour camp. As for his sister, she might have been removed, like Winston himself, to one of the colonies for homeless children, reclamation centres they were called, which had grown up as a result of a civil war, or she might have been sent to a labour camp along with his mother, or simply left somewhere or other to die. The dream was still vivid in his mind, especially the enveloping protecting gesture of the arm, in which its whole meaning seemed to be contained. His mind went back to another dream of 2 months ago, exactly as his mother had sat on the dingy, white-quilted bed, with the child clinging to her. So she had sat in the sunken ship far underneath him. Oh yeah, when there was drowning, yeah. And drowning deeper every minute, but still looking up at him through the darkening water. Yeah, that moment. That was an awful dream. He told Julia the story of his mother's disappearance. Without opening her eyes, she rolled over and settled herself into a more comfortable position. I expect you were a beastly little swine in those days, she said indistinctly. All children are swine. Yeah, but the real point of the story. And from her breathing it was evident she was going off to sleep again. And he would have liked to continue talking about his mother, but did not suppose from what he could remember of her that she had been an unusual woman. Still less an intelligent one, and simply because of the standards that she obeyed were private ones, her feelings were her own, and could not be altered from outside. It would not have occurred to her that an action which is ineffectual thereby becomes meaningless. If you love someone, you loved him, and when you had nothing else to give, you still gave him love. And when the last of the chocolate was gone, his mother clasped the child in her arms. It was no use. It changed nothing. It did not produce more chocolate. It did not avert the child's death or her own. But it seemed natural to her to do it. The refugee woman in the boat had also covered the little boy with her arm, which was no more use against the bullets than a sheet of paper. The terrible thing that the party had done was to persuade you that the mere impulses, mere feelings were of no account, while at the same time robbing you of all the power over the material world. When once you were in the grip of the party, what you felt or did not feel, what you did or refrained from doing, made literally no difference. Whatever happened to you, whatever happened, you vanished. And neither you nor your actions were ever heard of again. You were lifted clean out of the stream of history, and yet, to the people of only 2 generations ago, this would have not seemed all important, because they were not attempting to alter history. They were governed by private loyalties, which they did not question. What mattered were individual relationships and a completely hopeless gesture, an embrace, a tear, a word spoken to a dying man, could have value in itself. The proles, it suddenly occurred to him, had remained in this condition. They were not loyal to a party or a country or an idea. They were loyal to one another. For the first time in his life he did not despise the proles or think of them merely as an inert force which would one day spring to life and regenerate the world. The proles had stayed human. They had not become hardened inside. They had held on to the primitive emotions which he himself had to relearn by conscious effort. And in thinking this he remembered, without apparent relevance, how a few weeks ago he had seen a severed arm and not even flinched, a lying hand on the pavement, and had kicked it into the gutter as though it had been cabbage stalk. Yeah. The proles are human beings, he said out loud. We're not human. Why not? Said Julia, who had woken up again. And he thought for a little while. Has it ever occurred to you, he said, that the best thing for us to do would be simply to walk out of here before it's too late and never see each other again? Yes, dear. It has occurred to me several times, but I'm not going to do it all the same. We've been lucky, he said. But it can't last much longer. You're young. You look normal and innocent. If you keep clear of people like me, you might stay alive another 50 years. I thought it all through. What you do, I'm going to do. And don't be too downhearted. I'm rather good at staying alive. We may be together for another 6 months, a year. There's no knowing. At the end, we're certain to be apart. Do you realise how utterly alone we shall be? When once they get a hold of us, there will be nothing, literally nothing, that either of us can do for one another. If I confess, they'll shoot you. If I refuse to confess, they'll shoot you just the same. Nothing that I can do or say, or stop myself from saying, will put you off your death as much as 5 minutes. Neither of us will even know whether the other is alive or dead. We shall be utterly without power of any kind. The one thing that matters is that we shouldn't betray one another. Although even that can't make the slightest difference. If you mean confessing, she said. We shall do that, right enough. Everybody always confesses. You can't help it. They torture you. No, I don't mean confessing. Confessing is not betrayal. What you say or do doesn't matter. Only feelings matter. If they could make me stop loving you, that would be the real betrayal. She thought it over. They can't do that, she said finally. It's the one thing they can't do. They can't make you say anything, but they can make you believe it. They can't get inside of you. No, he said, a little more hopefully. No, that's quite true. They can't get inside of you if you can feel that staying human is worthwhile, even when it can't have any result whatever you've beaten them. Even if it can't have any result whatever, you've beaten them. He thought of the telescreen with its never sleeping ear. They could spy upon you night and day. If you kept your head, you could still outwit them. With all your cleverness, they have never mastered the secret of finding out what another human being was thinking. Perhaps that was less true when you were actually in their hands. One did not know what happened inside the Ministry of Love, but it was possible to guess. Tortures, drugs, delicate instruments that registered your nervous reactions, gradual wearing down by sleepiness and solitude and persistent questioning, facts at any rate, could not be kept hidden. And that is how you do torture people. You basically feed them a tranquilizer, you put them in a room, solitary, leave them alone, and just barrage them with questions. Just show up and be like, what's this? Never mind, fuck off. Then you come back later. What's this? Never mind, fuck off. And just leave them there. Just leave them. They'll tell you. They'll become delirious and just start talking. They could be tracked down by inquiry. They could be squeezed out of you by torture. But if the object was not to stay alive, but to stay human, what difference did it ultimately make? They could not alter your feelings, for that matter. You could not alter them yourself, even if you wanted to. They could not lay bare in the utmost detail everything that you had done or said or thought, but the inner heart, whose workings were mysterious, even to yourself, remained impregnable. Bubble. Who? Impregnable. I got the word out. So what is this, chapter 8, or is this a new... It's chapter 8, okay. They've done it. They've done it at last. The room they were standing in was long-shaped and softly lit. The telescreen was dim to a low murmur, and the richness of the dark blue carpet gave off the impression of treading on velvet. At a far end of the room, O'Brien was sitting at a table under... Oh, he's gone. He's done. He's gone in. He's gone in. Okay. Okay, he's meeting O'Brien. Ooh. Oh, it's been 2 hours. Oh, it's been 2 hours. Should I start reading this at least for 25 minutes? Wait, why do I want to do that? Oh. No. Oh. I've already done stuff. I can read for a little bit longer. Alright. They had done it. They had done it at last. The room, like, they were standing in was long-shaped and, like, softly lit. The telescreen was dim to, like, a low murmur. The richness of the dark blue carpet gave one the impression of treading on, like, velvet. At the far end of the room, O'Brien was sitting at a table under a green-shaded lamp, with a mass of papers on either side of him. Yeah. He had not bothered to look up when the servant showed Julia and Winston in. Whoa! They both went. Whoa! Winston's heart was thumping, man. So hard that he doubted whether he should be able to speak. They had done it. They'd done it at last. Was all he could think. It had been a rash act to come here at all. Man, and the sheer folly to arrive together. Though it was true that they had come by different routes, and only met on O'Brien's doorstep, but merely to walk into such a place needed an effort of the nerve. Man, I would not drop into a half pipe and totally like rip that shit. Nah. Wah, man. Yeah. It was only on very rare occasions that one saw inside the dwelling places of the inner party, or even penetrated into the quarter of the town where they lived. The whole atmosphere of the huge block of flats, the richness and spaciousness of everything, the unfamiliar smells of good food and good tobacco, and silent, incredibly rapid lifts sliding up and down, the white-jacketed servants hurrying to and fro, everything was intimidating. Although he had good pretext for coming here, he was haunted at every step by the fear that... Black uniform guard would suddenly appear from round the corner, demand his papers and order him to get out. O'Brien's servant, however, had admitted to the two of them without demur. He was a small, dark-haired man in a white jacket, with a diamond-shaped, completely expressionless face, which might have been that of a Chinese. Ooh. Captured one of his Mongolians. Do it in a black accent. Come on, man. There's plenty of black people out there. What's a black accent? That doesn't count. That's not an accent. I'm not falling into that trap. Be smarter. Be smarter. Don't do that. Be smarter. A black accent. Give me a break. Yo! Winston could not remember ever having seen a passageway whose walls were not grimy from the contact of human bodies. Yeah. Don't black accent me. Tell me a proper accent. Ah, I skipped a bit. Never mind. Never mind. Don't matter. Don't matter. I skipped a bit. O'Brien had a slip of paper between his fingers and seemed to be studying it intently. His heavy face bent down so that one could see the line of his nose. Looked both formidable and intelligent. For perhaps 20 seconds he sat without staring. Then he pulled the speaker right towards him and rapped out a message in the hybrid jargon of the ministries. Items 1,5,7 approved for wise. Stop suggestion. Contains some items 6 double plus. Ridiculous virgin crime think. Cancel. Stop. Unproceed construction wise. Anti-dating. Plus full estimates. Machinery overheads. Stop. End message. Oh. Do it in a Chinese accent. And it's called Black Scent. It's called a Black Scent. You see, here in England, where I live, the black people do have their own accent, but it is very much regulated to a form of like London air, which is being kind of derogatorized, and it's just happened that way. In America, it's a different kind of black accent. Don't make me say that like it's a thing. Oh, he rose deliberately from his chair. Oh, and came towards them. I've got to Mickey Rooney my face to make it work. Oh. And came towards them across on a soundless carpet. You should have said Indian. It's a soundless carpet. You should have said Indian. I actually watched a video recently of a guy actually flying a carpet. You know, doing wing walk, doing a wing suiting, but with a carpet. It was pretty funny. Pretty good, actually. A little of the official atmosphere seemed to be. Oh, never mind. It's just a posh guy. I'm just doing a posh guy. This isn't right. Or to have fallen away from him with the newspeak words, but his expression was grimmer than. Oh, usual. Oh. As though he went out pleased at being disturbed. I can't do that. I can't do that. I'm going to dry out my teeth and it's going to stick to my lips and I don't want that. I'm going to dry out my teeth because, you know, Chinese accent. The terror that Winston already felt was suddenly shot through by a streak of ordinary embarrassment. It seemed to him, quite possibly, that he had simply made a stupid mistake. For what evidence he had in reality that O'Brien was any kind of political conspirator? Nothing but a flash of the eyes and a single equivocal remark. Beyond that, only his own secret imaginings, founded on a dream. He could not even fall back on the pretense that he had come to borrow the dictionary, because in that case Julia's presence was impossible to explain. As O'Brien passed the telescreen, a thought seemed to strike him. He stopped, turned aside, and pressed a switch on the wall. There was a sharp snap. Her voice had stopped. Julia uttered a tiny sound, a sort of squeak of surprise. Even in the midst of his panic, Winston was too much taken aback to be able to hold his tongue. "You can turn it off," he said. "Yes," said O'Brien. "We can turn it off. We can have that privately. We can have that privilege." He was the opposite of them now. His solid form towered over the pair of them, and the expression on his face was still indecipherable. He was waiting somewhat sternly for Winston to speak. What about what? Even now it was quite conceivable that he was simply a busy man wondering irritably why he had been interrupted. Nobody spoke. After the stopping of the telescreen, the room seemed deadly silent. The seconds marched past. Enormous with difficulty, Winston continued to keep his eyes fixed on O'Brien's. Then... Can't smell. No, no, no. This is terrible. I already mentioned this earlier. I am terrible at Russian and Mexican accents because I have no real reference of them. No real reference of them. But I will give it my best shot. If anything, it's going to be Cheech Marin. That's the best I can probably do. as terrible as it is, but still, it's gonna try. Because it's never mind. Suddenly, the grim face broke down into what might have been the beginnings of a smile, with the characteristic gesture. I can't read that fast. I'm gonna have to slow down. With his characteristics, gesture O'Brien. Ah, fuck, that's fucking Irish. How would you do that? Nah, read. I know it's terrible. I never said it was good. Don't call it terrible. I know it was good. Keep going for accents. Just try. Just try. I mean, the story's going to remain the same. O'Brien resettled his spectacles on his nose. Shall I say it, or will you? He said. I will say it, said Winston promptly. That thing is really turned off. Yes, everything is turned off. We are alone. They all sound the same when I'm speaking like this, by the way. I can't do other accents or whatever. We have come here because... He paused, realizing for the first time the vagueness of his own motives, since he did not in fact know what kind of help he expected from O'Brien. It was not easy to say why he had come here. He went on, conscious that he was saying most sound both feeble and pretentious. We believe that there is some kind of conspiracy, some kind of secret organization working against the party, and that you are involved in it. We want to join in and work for it. We are enemies of the party. We disbelieve in the principles of Ingsoc. We are thought criminals. We are also adulterers. I tell you this because we want to put ourselves at your mercy. If you want us to incriminate ourselves in any other way, we are ready. He stopped and glanced over his shoulder with the feeling that the door had opened. Sure enough, the little yellow-faced servant had come in without knocking. Winston saw that he was carrying a tray with a decanter and glasses. Martin is one of us, said O'Brien impassively. Bring the drinks over here, Martin. Oh no, he's fat, isn't he?
Bring the drinks over here, Martin. Put them on the ground table. We have enough chairs, yes? Then we may as well sit down. Give me two. I need 2 chairs. Aha. And talk in comfort. Bring a chair for yourself, Martin. This is business. You can stop being a servant for the next 10 minutes.
That's the best I can do. I do apologize. That's the voice I gave him a while back. That's just what happened. The little man sat down quite at his ease, and yet still with a servant-like air, the air of a valet enjoying a privilege. Winston regarded him out the corner of his eye. It struck him that the man's whole life was playing a part, and that he felt it to be disingenuous to drop his assumed personality even for a moment. O'Brien took the decanter by the neck and filled up the glasses with a dark red liquid. It aroused in Winston dim memories of something seen long ago on a wall or a hoarding. A vast bottle composed of electric lights, which seemed to move up and down and pour its contents into a glass. Seen from the top, the stuff looked almost black, but in the decanter, it gleamed like a ruby. It had a sour sweet smell. He saw Julia pick up her glass and sniff at it with frank curiosity. Because only Frank can smell stuff like that. No one else, just Frank.
It's called wine,
said O'Brien with a faint smile.
You will have read about it in your books. No doubt. Not much of it lets out of party, I'm afraid. His
face grew solemn again, and he raised his glass.
I think it is fitting that we should begin by drinking to health. To our leader. To Emmanuel Cousin.
Winston took up his glass with a certain eagerness. Wine was a thing he had read and dreamed about, like the glass paperweight on Mr. Charrington's half-remembered rhymes. It belonged to the vanished, romantic past, the olden time, as he liked to call it, in secret thoughts. For some reason, he had always thought of wine as having intensely sweet taste, like that of blackberry jam, and an immediate intoxicating effect. Actually, when it came to swallow it, the stuff was distinctly disappointing. Really? Great revelation there, buddy. The truth was that after years of gin drinking, he could barely taste it. He sat down the empty glass. Then there is such a person.
Then there is such a person as Goldstein,
He said.
Yes, there is such a person, and he is alive. Why do I not know? Oh, where? I do not know. Ah, that's the one. That's the sentence you need. Aha. I understand now. And the conspiracy, the organization, is it real? It is not simply an invention of the thought police. No, it is real. The Brotherhood, we call it. You will never learn much more about the Brotherhood than that it exists and that you belong to it. I will come back to that presently.
He looked at his wristwatch. It was unwise even for members at the inner party to turn off the telescreen for more than half an hour. You ought not to come here together, and you will have to leave separately. Ah.
It is unwise even for members of the inner party to turn off the telescreen for more than half an hour. You ought not to have come here together. You will have to leave separately. You, comrade.
He bowed his head to Julia.
You will leave first. We have about 20 minutes at our disposal. You will understand that I must start by asking certain questions. In general terms, what are you prepared to do?
Anything that we're capable of, said Winston. O'Brien had turned himself a little in his chair so that he was facing Winston. He almost ignored Julia, seeming to take it for granted that Winston could speak for her. For a moment, the lids flitted down over his eyes. He began asking his questions in a low, expressionless voice, as though this were routine, a sort of catechism, most of whose answers were known to him already.
You are prepared to give your lives and eat this burger?
I'm kidding. Yes.
You are prepared to commit murder?
Yes.
To commit acts of sabotage, which may cause the death of hundreds of innocent people?
Yes.
To betray your country for foreign powers?
Yes.
You are prepared to cheat, to forge, to blackmail, to corrupt the minds of children, to distribute habit-forming drugs, to encourage prostitution, to disseminate venereal disease, to do anything which is likely to cause demoralization and weaken the power of the prophecy.
Yes. I feel like this is like a Meatloaf song. This is just really, really long.
If, for example, it will somehow serve our interest to throw sulfuric acid in a child's face, are you prepared to do that?
Yes. You took the words right out of my mouth. Sorry.
You are prepared to lose your identity and live out the rest of your life as a waiter or a dog walker?
Yes.
You are prepared to commit suicide if and when we order you to do so?
Yes.
You are prepared, the two of you, to separate and never see one another again?
Broke in Julia. It appeared to Winston that a long time passed before he answered. For a moment, he seemed even to have been deprived of the power of speech. His tongue worked soundlessly, forming the opening syllables first of one word, then of another, and over again. Until he had said it. He did not know which word he was going to say.
No!
He said finally.
You did well to tell me,
said O'Brien.
it is necessary for us to know if...
He turned himself toward Julia and added in a voice with somewhat more expression in it.
Do you understand that even if he survives, it may be as different as a person? We may be obliged to give him a new identity. His face, his movement, the shape of his hands, the colour of his hair, even his voice would be different. And you yourself might have to become a different person. Our surgeons can alter people beyond recognition. I was never this fat. Ha ha ha. I just don't think this way. Sometimes it is necessary, sometimes we even amputate a limb.
Winston could not help snatching another sidelong glance at Martin's Mongolian face. There were no scars that he could see. Julia had turned a shade paler, so that her freckles were showing, but she faced O'Brien boldly. She murmured something that seemed to be assent. Good. Then that's settled. There was a silver box of cigarettes on the table. With rather absent-minded air, O'Brien pushed them towards the others, took one for himself, then stood up and began to pace slowly to and fro, as though he could think better standing. They were very good cigarettes, very thick and well packed, with an unfamiliar silkiness in the paper. O'Brien looked at his wristwatch again.
You had better go back to your pantry, Martin,
he said.
I shall switch on in a quarter of an hour. Take a good look at these comrades' faces before you go. You will be saying again, I may not.
Exactly as they had done at the front door, the little man's dark eyes flickered over their faces. There was not a trace of friendliness in this manner. He was memorizing their appearance, but he felt no interest in them, or appeared to feel none. It occurred to Winston that a synthetic face was perhaps incapable of changing its expression. Without speaking or giving any kind of salutation, Martin went out. Closing the door silently behind him, O'Brien was strolling up and down, one hand in the pocket of his black overalls, the other holding his cigarette.
You understand, he said, that you will be fighting in the dark. You will always be in the dark. You will always receive orders and you will obey them without knowing why. Later, I shall send you a book from which you will learn the true nature of the society we live in and the strategy by which we shall destroy it. When you have read the book, you will be full members of the Brotherhood. But between the general aims that we are fighting for and the immediate tasks of the moment, you will never know anything. I tell you that the Brotherhood exists, but I cannot tell you whether its members are 100 members or 10 million. From your personal knowledge, you will never be able to prepare that its numbers, even as many as a dozen. You will have 3 or 4 contacts who will be renewed from time to time as they disappear. As this was your first contact, I will be preserved. When you receive orders, they will come from me. It will find it necessary to communicate with you. He will be through the Martin. When you are finally caught.
Well, thanks. When you're finally caught. That's just something I want to hear. Are you kidding me?
When you are finally caught, you will confess. That is unavoidable. But you will have very little to confess, other than your own actions.
I'm doing the Chinese thing again.
You will not be able to betray more than a handful of unimportant people. Probably you will not even betray me. By that time, I may be dead. Or I shall have become a different person, with a different place.
You can kind of imagine what he looks like, can't you? He continued to move to and fro over the soft carpet. In spite of the bulkiness of his body, there was a remarkable grace in his movements. They always say that about fat people. Oh, no. Oh. It came out even in the gesture with which he thrust his hand into his pocket, or manipulated a cigarette, even more than a strength. He gave an impression of confidence and that of an understanding tinged by irony. However much in earnest he might be, he had nothing of the single-mindedness that belongs to a fanatic. When he spoke of murder, suicide, venereal disease, amputated limbs, and altered faces, it was with a faint air of persiflage. This is unavoidable, his voice seemed to say. This is what we have got to do, unflinchingly, but this is not what we shall be doing when life is worth living again. A wave of admiration, almost of worship, flowed out of Winston towards O'Brien. For the moment, he had forgotten the shadowy figure of Goldstein. When you looked at O'Brien's powerful shoulders and his blunt-featured face, so ugly and yet so civilized, it was impossible to believe that he could be defeated. Kingpin! There was no stratagem that he was not equal to, no danger that he could not foresee. Even Julia seemed to be impressed. She had let her cigarette go out and was listening intently. O'Brien went on.
You will have heard rumours of the existence of the Brotherhood. No doubt you have formed your own picture of it. You have imagined, probably, a huge underworld of conspirators meeting secretly to tell us, leaving messages on walls, recognizing one another by code words, or by special movements of the hand. Nothing of the kind exists. The members of the Brotherhood have no way of recognizing one another, and it is impossible for any one member to be aware of the identity of more than a few men. Oh shit. Than a few. Oh, fucking hell. Others. That was the word I was missing. Others. Goldstein himself, if he fell into the hands of the Fort Police, could not give them a complete list of members, or, in any formation, any information that would lead them to a complete list. Or, no such list exists. The Brotherhood cannot be wiped out because it is not an organization in the ordinary sense. Nothing holds it together except an idea, which is indestructible. So this is the current day Anonymous. So that's what the Brotherhood is. Anonymous. That's what they are. Or the Illuminati, if you would, maybe. Who knows? Who knows? Hang on a minute. But O'Brien later on, never mind. I won't spoil it. Nothing holds it together except an idea which is indestructible. You will never have anything to sustain you except the idea. You will get no comradeship and no encouragement. Oh, what is that? That's a weird accent. I'll stop that. When finally you are caught, you will get no help. We never help our members. At most, when it is absolutely necessary that someone should be silent, we are occasionally able to struggle and isolate into a prisoner cell. You will have to get used to living without results and without hope. Oh, no hope. You will work for a while. You will be caught, you will confess, and then you will die. Those are the only results that you will ever see. There is no possibility that any perceptible change will happen within our own lifetime. We are the dead. Our only true life is in the future. We shall take part in these handfuls of dust and splinters of bone, but how far away the future may be, there is no knowing. It might be 1,000 years. At present, nothing is possible except to extend the area of sanity little by little. We cannot act collectively. We can only spread our knowledge outwards from the individual to individual, generation after generation. In the face of the thought police, there is no other way. He halted and looked for the third time at his wristwatch. It's almost time for you to leave, comrade, he said to Julia. Wait! The decanter! The decanter is half full! He filled the glass and raised his own glass by the stem. What shall I really start? He said, still with the same faint suggestion of irony. To the confusion. To the confusion of thought police. To the death of Big Brother, to humanity. To the future. To the past, said Winston. To the more important, agreed O'Brien gravely. They emptied their glasses, and a moment later Julia stood up to go. O'Brien took a small box from the top of a cabinet and handed her a flat white tablet, which he told her to place on her tongue. It was important, he said, not to go out smelling of wine. The lift attendants were very observant. As soon as the door had shut behind her, he appeared to forget her existence. He took another pace or two up and down and then stopped. There are details to be settled, he said. I assume that you have a hiding place behind.
Winston explained about the room over Mr. Charrington's shop.
That will do for the moment. Later we will arrange something else for you. It is important to change one's hiding place frequently. Meanwhile, I shall send you a copy of the book.
Do you remember that? The book. Do you remember the book? Do you remember the book? It was mentioned earlier. Like a long time ago, technically. But it was mentioned ages ago. And that's how it's always referred to by the inner parties.
The book.
Even O'Brien, Winston noticed, seemed to pronounce the words as though they were in italics.
Goldstein's books, you understand. As soon as possible. It may be some days before I can get a hold of one. But there are not many in existence. There are not many in existence. As you can imagine, the thought police hunt them down and destroy them almost as fast as we can produce them. It makes very little difference. The book is indestructible. If the last copy were gone, we could reproduce it almost word for word. Do you carry a briefcase to work with?
He added. As a rule, yes.
What's it like?
Black, very shabby, 2 straps.
Black, 2 straps, very shabby. Good, good, good. One day, in the fairly near future, I cannot give you a date. One of the messages among your morning's work will contain a misprinted word, and you will have to ask for a repeat. On the following day, you will go to work without your briefcase. At some time during the day in the street, a man will touch you on the arm and say, I think you've dropped your briefcase. The one he gives you will contain a copy of Goldstein's book. You will return it within 14 days.
They were silent for a moment.
There are a couple of minutes before you need to go,
said O'Brien.
We shall meet again, and if we do meet again...
Winston looked up at him. In the place where there is no darkness, he said hesitantly. O'Brien nodded, without appearance of surprise. In the place where there is no darkness, he said, as though he had recognized the allusion. And in the meantime, is there anything that you wish to say before you leave? Oh, is my stream dying? Oh, my stream's dying. Tell you what, then, this is the last of the chat.